What if I told you there is a plant that produces 5 separate edible foods from a single vine? What if I told you its seeds contain more protein than lentils, more oil than most legumes, and an amino acid profile that rivals animal meat? What if I told you its roots contain 20% protein, more than any root crop known to science? What if I told you it fixes its own nitrogen, needs no fertilizer, and actually rebuilds the soil it grows in? What if I told you the United States National Academy of Sciences documented all of this in 1905? And what if I told you that 51 years later, you still cannot buy it in a grocery store? Would you ask what happened? Or would you ask who benefits from you not knowing? The plant is called the winged bean. Its scientific name is Sophocarpus tetragonum. It belongs to the legume family, Fabaceae, the same family as soybean, chickpea, and lentil. It grows as a climbing vine, 3 to 4 meters tall, roughly 10 to 13 feet, with twining leafy stems and large, pale blue flowers. It is a tropical perennial, though most farmers grow it as an annual. It emerges from seed in 5 to 7 days. It flowers as early as 40 days after planting. Its pods reach full length within 2 weeks of pollination. And within 3 months of putting a seed in the ground, you are eating food. But what makes this plant different from every other legume on Earth is not its speed. It is its completeness. The pods are edible raw. You pick them young, under 2.5 centimeters, and eat them like green beans. The immature seeds inside taste like garden peas. The mature seeds, dried and roasted, contain 29 to 45% protein, depending on the variety, and 15 to 20% edible oil. The amino acid profile of those seeds is rich in lysine and tryptophan, the 2 amino acids most commonly deficient in grain-based diets, the 2 amino acids that make the difference between adequate and inadequate nutrition for hundreds of millions of people. The leaves are eaten like spinach. The flowers are used in salads and 2-colored rice and pastry. And the roots, the part that almost nobody talks about, produce tubers that contain 12 to 20% protein by weight, the highest of any root crop ever measured. Higher than potato, higher than yam, higher than cassava, higher than sweet potato. From one vine, one planting, one stalk, you get 5 separate categories of food: pods, seeds, leaves, flowers, tubers. In 1975, the National Academy of Sciences of the United States published a report. It was 41 pages long. The subject was one plant. They wrote that it was, and I am quoting, one of the most nutritionally complete plants ever documented. They called it a supermarket on a single stalk. That phrase was not poetic exaggeration. It was a technical assessment, published by the most authoritative scientific body in the United States, based on the work of an ad hoc panel that had reviewed 36 underexploited tropical crops and singled out one for special attention. The reaction was immediate. Within 7 years, the winged bean was being grown in more than 70 countries. Over 1,000 researchers in more than 60 nations were subscribed to a dedicated scientific newsletter called The Winged Bean Flyer. Theodore Himowitz, an agronomist at the University of Illinois and a member of the Academy panel, told the New York Times in 1982, and I am quoting again, "It is like an ice cream cone. You eat the whole thing." That same year, the Times published a headline on the front page of its science section. It read, "Winged bean hailed as potent weapon against malnutrition." The article described how the crop combined the desirable characteristics of the green bean: the garden pea, spinach, mushroom, soybean, bean sprout, and potato. It noted that the flowers, sweetened by nectar, could be sautéed to produce a food that resembled mushrooms. It reported that the leaves matched spinach in taste and nutritive value. It stated that the tubers were like potatoes, but far richer in protein. And it concluded that the winged bean promised to become the soybean of the tropics, where it alone may do more than any combination of foods to counter malnutrition. That was February 23, 1982, 44 years ago. Now I need you to sit with that date for a moment. 44 years. Because what happened between 1982 and today is the real story. And the real story is not a story about botany. It is a story about money. Let me show you what the winged bean was up against. The global soybean market is currently valued at between $209 and $226 billion. In the United States alone, soy is the #1 agricultural export, contributing $29.6 billion to the economy. In 2018, When trade war disruptions hit American soybean farmers, the United States government paid $5.1 billion in subsidies to soybean producers alone. That was 8.5% of the total subsidies distributed by the Market Facilitation Program that year. $5.1 billion for one crop in 1 year in one country. That is just the direct subsidy. The infrastructure around soybean, the processing plants, the crushing facilities, the shipping routes, the futures contracts, the animal feed pipelines, the oil extraction systems, that infrastructure did not develop by accident. It was built over decades with public money, private investment, government policy, and deliberate institutional choices about which crops deserve research funding and which do not. Now place the winged bean beside that machine. Here is a vine that grows in the tropics. It does not need fertilizer because it fixes its own nitrogen from the air through symbiotic bacteria on its root nodules. It does not need expensive seeds because you save your own. It does not need a processing plant because you eat the pods raw. Cook the seeds like any bean, boil the tubers like potatoes, and toss the leaves in a pan. It does not need pesticide because it is naturally vigorous and disease-resistant. It does not need irrigation in humid climates because it thrives in heavy rainfall, and it does not just take from the soil. When you plow the stalk back in after harvest, it adds nitrogen to the ground. It restores what it uses. It leaves the land better than it found it. No fertilizer, no pesticide, no irrigation, no processing, no supply chain, no patent, no shareholder. Do you see the problem? The problem is not that the winged bean does not work. The problem is that it works too well, and it works for free, and it works for the people who grow it, not for the people who sell inputs. A crop that needs nothing is worth nothing to an industry built on selling everything. And so research slowed. Not because the science failed, the science was extraordinary, but because the funding stopped. A comprehensive review published in Planta in 2019 stated it plainly. Despite the international attention dedicated to this crop during the 1970s and 1980s, research has been inconsistent ever since. The crop remains cultivated mainly on a subsistence scale. Structured improvement programs were never established. Germplasm characterization stalled. Breeding was abandoned before it could begin in earnest. A 2019 paper confirmed that while substantial information came from the initial efforts, the momentum dissipated and the plant was returned to the margins of agricultural science. In 1985, a paper appeared in the journal Ecology of Food and Nutrition. Its title was The Winged Bean. Will the wonder crop be another flop? In 1986, two researchers at the University of Illinois, Srikantha and Erdman, responded with a letter titled, Is Winged Bean Really a Flop? Their point was that the plant had not failed. The system had stopped funding it. There is a difference between a crop that cannot feed people and a crop that the system chose not to develop. And understanding that difference is the key to understanding how the global food system actually works. Consider the numbers. More than half of all human calories now come from just 3 crops: rice, wheat, corn. 3 species feed the planet, and when one fails, there is no backup. The AAO has reported repeatedly that this lack of agrodiversity makes the global food supply dangerously vulnerable. Monocultures fail on a large scale. They require synthetic fertilizer, which requires fossil fuel. They deplete soil. They demand irrigation. They depend on pesticides. And they collapse when conditions change. Now, consider the winged bean again. It is not a monoculture crop. It is a garden crop, a smallholder crop, a subsistence crop. It cannot be scaled the way soybean is scaled because it is a vine that needs a trellis, not a combine. It is sensitive to day length, meaning most varieties flower only when days are shorter than 12 hours, limiting it to the tropics. Its mature seeds contain trypsin inhibitors that require 2 to 3 hours of cooking to destroy. These are real limitations. I am not going to pretend they are not. But here is what those limitations actually mean. They mean the winged bean cannot compete in the commodity market. They mean it does not fit the business model. They do not mean it cannot feed people. They do not mean it is not extraordinarily nutritious. They do not mean a family in Nigeria, or Myanmar, or Sri Lanka, or Papua New Guinea, or the Philippines, or Indonesia cannot grow it in their yard. Eat 5 separate foods from one vine and improve their soil in the process. In the highlands of Papua New Guinea, this crop has been cultivated for centuries. In Myanmar, women sell boiled tubers in the open-air markets of Mandalay. In the Philippines, the pods are simmered in coconut milk in a dish called ginotangsi rilas. In Sri Lanka, villagers consume every part of the plant. In Java, Indonesia, the mature seeds are roasted like peanuts or boiled. These are not laboratory results. These are kitchen traditions, spanning centuries across continents. And yet, the IITA, the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, holds winged bean germplasm in its gene bank. The CGIAR system has funded some recent diversity assessment. A few researchers have begun using modern molecular tools, genotyping by sequencing, transcriptomic profiling, to finally characterize the genetic diversity that was never properly mapped in the 70s and 80s. But these are small, scattered efforts. They are not a program, they are not a priority, and they are decades late. Meanwhile, the soybean industry has driven 133,000 hectares of Amazon deforestation past its own moratorium deadline. A study published in Nature in 2025 linked the profits from soy corn double, cropping to 343 to 390 square kilometers of additional forest loss. The soybean supply chain circles the planet. The processing infrastructure is enormous. The environmental cost is staggering, and the system continues to pour billions into propping it up, while a vine that fixes its own nitrogen and rebuilds dead soil sits in a gene bank in Ibadan. I want to go back to the NAS report for a moment. They looked at 36 tropical crops. They chose one. They called it a supermarket on a single stock. They said it deserved global investment. 7 years later, the New York Times confirmed the excitement. 70 countries were growing it. 1,000 researchers were studying it. And then the money moved elsewhere. The researchers dispersed. The newsletter stopped. The crop went back to the margins. Now it is 2026. There are 8 billion people on this planet. 9 billion by 2050. The FAO says food production must increase by 70%. Arable land is shrinking. Fresh water is shrinking. Soil is degrading. And there is a plant that produces 5 foods from one vine, grows in dead soil, needs no fertilizer, needs no pesticide, fixes its own nitrogen, restores the ground it grows in, delivers 35% protein in the seed, 20% protein in the root, 15% protein in the leaf, and an amino acid profile that fills the exact nutritional gaps left by grain-based diets. And it is still classified as underutilized. I want you to think about that word, underutilized. It is a clinical term. It sounds neutral, but it is not neutral. Underutilized means someone decided not to utilize it. Underutilized means funding was allocated elsewhere. Underutilized means institutional attention was directed toward crops that generate revenue for input sellers, processors, and commodity traders, and away from crops that generate nutrition for the people who plant them. The winged bean does not need a marketing campaign. It does not need a rebrand. It does not need a celebrity endorsement. It needs what the NAS said it needed in 1975: investment, breeding, structured research, development of day-length neutral varieties that can grow beyond the tropics, reduction of anti-nutritional factors through conventional selection, standardized agronomic trials, yield optimization, supply chain development for processed products like tempeh, tofu, flour, and plant milk, because yes, winged bean can be blended into milk that tastes cleaner than soy milk. All of that was possible in 1982. It is more possible now with modern genomics, and none of it happened, not because the plant failed, because the $200 billion crop did not want competition. You asked me at the beginning, would you ask what happened? Or would you ask who benefits from you not knowing? Now you know the answer to both questions. What happened is that a crop that could feed millions was studied, celebrated, validated by the highest scientific authority in the United States, grown in 70 countries, and then abandoned when it became clear that it could not be commodified. And who benefits from you not knowing is every institution, every corporation, every policy framework that profits from a food system built on dependency rather than sufficiency. The winged bean does not need you to fight for it. It survived for centuries without institutional support. It is growing right now in backyards in Myanmar, in markets in Mandalay, in highland gardens in Papua New Guinea, in kitchen plots across Southeast Asia. But it does need you to know it exists, because a food system that hides a plant this complete, this nutritious, this resilient, this generous, is not a system designed to feed you. It is a system designed to sell to you, and there is a difference. The vine is still growing. The question is whether you will let it grow in your mind.